If I can ask our panel attendees to step up onto the virtual stage, please. And Lucy, if you could arrange that, that'd be fantastic. Great, so we'll just wait as everybody joins. We've got 2 more to join, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1 more. There we go. Can I ask, welcome one and all, can I ask you to firstly, starting with Dave and working clockwise, if you could introduce yourself, so your name, your organisation, what you do. I know you've already done that, but just a brief introduction, and then we'll move into questions.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Dave Eagle, One Spatial. I look after our relationship with Safe Software. I'm the FME division manager.
Sorry, who's next? Is it me or someone else? Okay, I'll go. I'm Luca Budello. I lead on geospatial at KTN. My main work is about supporting the geospatial community to connect cross-sector, to connect with those industry verticals where the geospatial intelligence add value, help to grow the economy, and provide positive environmental and social impact.
Brilliant, thank you. Davin?
Davin Crowley-Sweet. I'm Chief Data Officer for Highways England.
Thank you. Chris? Oh,
you're on mute. Chris.
Chris Couchman, Jazz Manager for Fusion. We do the enabling work for phase 1 of HST.
Thank you. And last but not least, Seb.
Yeah, I'm Seb Lesware, and I'm CTO at One Spatial.
Brilliant. Thank you. So this is a request out to the audience. If you do have panel questions for the panel, please fire them through. I have some questions prepared, so let me just bring that up. I need my glasses. Right, so this is an open question to the panel, so please chip in, whoever wants to take the first stab at it. What do you see as the key challenges facing transportation in the next 10 years, and how do you see data helping to solve those challenges? So quite a wide open question.
Okay, I'll start if you want. I mean, I guess I'm talking about it from the other side of the fence, and everyone else on this call are probably a lot more embedded than me. The way I imagine it is that it's going to be a lot more about real-time information. So rather than just recording information about the assets and then going away and planning based on that, it's going to be a lot more integration of real-time decision making and integrating it with wider systems to, people talk about sort of smart cities and things like that, where transport network is just one network amongst many, and that's where that integration between networks and the data flowing between them is going to become more prominent.
Okay, thank you, Seb. And Davin and Chris, working within infrastructure networks at the moment, do you see that as a potential challenge, or do you see other challenges more important?
No, I think. Sorry, go on.
Oh, thanks. I think it is something we need to do, but I don't think that's I wouldn't agree that that's the challenge. I think the challenge is that I think people don't differentiate, organizations don't differentiate between data and technology, and they assume their technology maturity is the same as their data maturity. And what we've got is a market that the technology is rapidly evolving, and the ability to use it is rapidly evolving, but our ability to manage the data that's in the technology is so far behind the technology itself. And I think there's a growing disconnect between our data maturity and our technology maturity. We'll get to a point where we need to do all these things for real, and actually we just won't have the data professionals and the data structures, and I mean organizational structures, to be able to do it. That's my big nerves internally. Like, so if I look how many organizations have a technology architecture and EA, but how many of them actually have a data architect or a data engineer, it's far and few between.
Yeah. And Chris, do you see that playing out within the supply chain that you're working in, whether there's that kind of?
Yeah, I think the word got used earlier, which was trust. If people don't trust something, they will use their own Excel spreadsheets and do their own data structures, because there's no trust there, because that's what they know. So there's obviously nothing wrong with Excel, but if people were doing all their data silos, we don't have data structure, and then we can't have automation from it. So trust is an important word, and is effectively what BIM is towards. It's trusting your data, so everyone buys into it.
Okay, and sorry, go on, Luca.
No, Prisco, I do have a different take on the challenges of the transport sector, which is more related to the climate issue. Transport is the single biggest contributor to the carbon emission. So reducing the number of vehicles on the road, the length of the journeys will be some of the challenges that we need to tackle using data as and the intelligence that come from robust quality data in processes to tackle these challenges. We need to recreate the infrastructure, which perhaps needs to be geared to multimodal transport journey, maybe active transport journey. We need to build the infrastructure for electric vehicles and upgrading the public transport. So the challenges are many, and I think standards is one in terms of data. Finding a solution for standards that are declared, understood, applied, and trusted by everyone is one of the challenge that we need to focus on the data side of things. One last thing, I like to be in, it's nice to see that the public sector is rising to the challenges, and we have the Innovate UK Future Flight 130 million Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund to reimagine the future of air city mobility, and the recently announced transport location data SBRI. These are all initiatives that put us on the path to resolving some of these challenges, I think.
Yeah, thank you. So we've got that kind of.
I agree with what Lucas said. I think just to add to the climate change scenario, there's the obvious COVID-19 impact. I mean, I think our everybody here is traveling very differently to how they traveled 12 months ago. There is an emphasis on local now, and making sure that we use the benefit of the amount of data that we have accumulated in the last 12 months about the change in patterns, and the emphasis around, as Luke is saying, multimodal, and a shift to more local transport methods, I think is going to be really important. But I mean, the only other thing that I think is going to be a big impact is legal. There are going to have to be some legal changes. There's got to be some changes to the types of vehicles that are allowed on the road, the impact of autonomous driving, autonomous delivery, the last mile delivery. There's going to be some significant changes that have to come into place to allow some of these things to even be possible.
Yeah, so, and the reduction of those carbon emissions for the UK's net zero targets by 2050 or 2045. It's crucial, isn't it? Okay, so there's a mix of answers there. Thank you for that, ranging from those big top-down drivers to the kind of standards, COVID-19, the legalities. Okay, so moving on to the next question. We've heard a lot today about good quality data or good quality location data acting as the glue between people, systems, and other data. What do you see as and we may have touched on this already, what do you see as the challenges associated to using location data specifically as the glue between tying these disparate silos of people, systems, and data together? So the challenges around using location data to tie people, systems, and data together.
Privacy. It's always at the top of the list. Privacy about how that data is shared, used, redacted, the precision that information is provided in. I think, it's if you talk to anybody on the street, the first thing they want to know is, how are you going to identify me? And I think that's a really key issue that has to be gotten right, because as soon as you go public with a service, it'll fall down immediately if people are being emphasized. There the Strava example a little while ago, where all of the military bases were identified through Strava data, was a classic example of how that privacy issue hadn't been addressed or even thought of. I think actually it was a result of viewing that data. So.
Okay. Thanks, Dave. Anybody else like to pick that up?
I do agree with David. Privacy by design should be embedded on building any system. I'd like to focus on something else, which is terms of use and licensing mechanisms. I think in the data side of the issue is probably one of the biggest challenges to integrate the disparate data sets coming from different silos, from different ownership. If terms of use and licensing mechanisms are not agreed, well, the risk is that data owner will not see the value, will not be incentivized to share their data because they will not see the value that they can capture by sharing it, and therefore keep it for themselves as a competitive advantage.
Yes, thank you, Luca. And I suppose that ties to Davin. You're a public sector organisation, a large public sector organisation. I'm sure you're sharing data with other. You mentioned Network Rails as well. I mean, what's the incentive for Highways England to share your data?
I spoke about the incentives earlier. That it's our customer's customer, so it creates value for us. It creates value for them. I think the comments around privacy. I also think we've got to recognise their generational things. So I'm 39 and I've got a view of privacy. My dad's 81 and he's got a very different view of privacy. And my 13-year-old son would gladly sell you his location data if you gave him Fortnite credits. And I think you look at the time differences between those generations, and it's not much. The iPad's 11 years old, and look how different life is as a result. And I think the pace of change that we're able to enact change is much, much longer than the zeitgeist is changing in public. And I fear that we're always going to be chasing and never leading, because the generational thinking is chasing faster than our ability to deliver. And I think that comes from us still pursuing this age-old way of delivering solutions with arcane processes of waterfall, and thinking that you have to know 100% of what you're building before you even start thinking about it. Gone are the days where you can get away with an 8-year-long IT mega program. You have to turn something around within 4 to 12 weeks, or otherwise it's gone, it's too late, and it's moved on. And I think our ability to really recognize the generational requirements of people and their differing views around ethics, around how information is used, is important before we spend 10 years designing an ethics system for a group of people that will never actually drive on it because they'll be too old. And meanwhile, it doesn't serve the people that are actually going to be using our road network.
Yeah. And do you see that changing, and organisations changing to the point where they can evolve quickly, especially large public sector organisations? They tend to be, or any large organisation tends to move, has more inertia than a smaller, more nimble entrepreneurial organisation. I mean, are you fighting a losing battle, or do you see public sector organisations changing them in that manner?
I think public organisations, in my view, get an unfair rap of being slow and bureaucratic, because if you look at all the big advances in technology, they've normally come from the public sector. The private sector is nowhere near as fast as they'd let you believe. I think the challenge with the private sector is there's so many people trying to do it when it comes to data. I stumble across 5 different GIS projects that are all trying to do the same thing at the same week. And I think where the public sector is probably lacking is, where is our national chief data officer? It's great that we've got a national data strategy, but where's those governing structures to really, take pet projects and then turn them into real things so they happen? And that's my challenge with the public sector, that I find there's so many people with access to capital that start little pet projects rather than focusing on the big 3, making sure they're strategic priorities and following them through. A really good quote when I joined Highways England was that we had more pilots than British Airways. And I think That's very true.
Great, thank you. Let's shift on to another question. I'm conscious of time as well. Should we go to one more? Okay, so again, a very wide open question. It's a sort of future vision question. But what automation and AI playing in the processing of data over the coming 10 years? So the part of AI and automation and processing of data in the next 10 years.
Okay, do you want me to start with that? So, I mean, automation is critical for handling the larger and larger amounts of data to coming in and being able to do something quickly enough, respond quickly, as Davin was saying. And similarly with AI, it's I mean, some people talk about it as if it's, the magic silver bullet that's going to do everything, and it's just another tool in the toolbox that can do certain tasks well. It can, if you've got the data that's correct and clean and unbiased. And so what we've been seeing recently, we've seen lots of projects kick off, trying to do stuff, some successful, some not successful, and we'll see the sort of the low-hanging fruit be picked off and get some success in a sort of constrained, limited way. And some projects will be, I guess, a bit over-optimistic and not quite achieve what they want, and they'll scale back, and there'll be just a natural settling down of, right, we will found the successful use cases and push through with those. So it will, they'll continue to be used. It's a nice bandwagon that everyone's sort of jumping on and trying to get something out of there. So, for example, if you look at automated driving, then 10 years ago it was still pretty much impossible dream. Now it's practical, but it's practical on a dry, sunny Californian highway network. Driving through the lanes of Cambridgeshire and coming across a tractor with a handmade sign saying "road closed," it's not going to deal with that. And so, once you broaden out from the sort of the happy path use cases, it gets more and more complex. And so these things are going to be, for a long, long time, they're still going to be assistive tools. They're not going to replace people. They're just going to assist them. And so that's where I see it going in the short term, anyway.
Okay, thank you, Seb. Would anybody else like to pick that up?
I'd like to bring a new concept in the sense that I'm kind of dodging the question because in my view is one of the main challenges for automation is micropayment, is building a system, a business model that enable machine-to-machine enable micropayment. And in this sense, blockchain becomes a more interesting technology to discuss, because blockchain has the ability to record transaction in a secure distributed database, might be able, when it becomes mature, to allow through a crypto asset, to a native crypto asset, to create a new business model that, for example, put two IoT devices in communication, and they can communicate and exchange value and exchange payments in very micro and very small amounts for services that those two machines require from one another. An example could be an agricultural machine that needs to access not an entire tile of high resolution satellite image, but just 1 meter by 1 meter, and can do that perhaps by communicating in real time to a cloud platform, exchange a micropayment via crypto assets, and receive that only the data that needs to perform the action that is required.
So you're speaking to the idea of radical innovation, which may not have been implemented yet, but it will to dramatically change the business models and the way we live, and that radical innovation will come down the line.
Yes, I suppose. The point is automation is not just cars; it's also the various technology that can communicate, the various machines that can communicate to one another, and we need to enable a business model to make that profitable and sustainable.
Thank you.
I've got some to add to that one. So we're using a lot of AI at the moment, whether it be object detection in vehicles to spot where potholes or floods are and all sorts of things. So I think it's more present in organizations than people think. I think the scary thing about AI is that no one understands how it works. And that's inherent in its nature, making the algorithms explainable, because people think AI is a better way of finding an answer, and it's not. It's a better way of producing an algorithm to find an answer. And I think the challenge will be is that no one can really explain how a neural net produces the answer that it does. We just know that the answer seems to match reality when it produces it. And that comes with some really ethical questions around, let's fast forward 20 years and you're in fully autonomous cars. A car is, let's say, a scenario where a car is going to crash into two groups of people. Which one does it choose? How did it choose it? If that's an inevitability, if it's going to crash, someone had to code that, someone had to be involved that, and you could get into really scary scenarios around the data sets the car had access to that created biases in who it chose, i.e., is it an 80-year-old person walking over the road, or is it a 20-year-old pregnant woman walking over the road? Who does it choose? And I think we will end up in really deep ethical quandaries around trying to make decisions explainable. And I think the big concerns for it is that the legislative world or regulation-wise has nowhere even caught up with the standards. So if I take the world of safety critical systems, look at the legislation in place to make sure you can build a safety critical system and test it to the appropriate technology readiness levels and safety integrity levels, yet a 20-year-old in Shoreditch can knock up a startup company and flog AI algorithms within a week if they choose to, completely outside of regulation, purely because they've got a good marketing department.
Yeah. And that, you touched on a couple of things there, Davin. You talked about trust and trust in the algorithms, which sort of expands from Chris was mentioning about trust in the data. We'll see more of that. But that ethical side of AI as it's implemented, and the car crash example, and by its nature, legislation is a slow-moving beast, isn't it? Law and legislation is slow compared to, as you say, those guys in Shoreditch who are knocking stuff up over a weekend.
And we've seen examples of it already in the States around the insurance and in banking, where people are being rejected loans based on AI algorithms because of data sets that the algorithm had access to. So it had worked out that women were less able to pay loans because they were less working, and then due to the fact that women should be not given as much money. So it's crazy because it just misinterpreted the biases that are in the data, that more women tend to stay at home to look after children than work. That doesn't make them a bad lender or a bad debt credit reader. And these things are becoming more and more prevalent and are actually, they'll become more in public eye, and leaders of organizations will be expected to explain how their algorithms work. And I don't think they're equipped to do so.
Especially in this world of sustainability and providing not just an environmentally friendly but a socially fair world. I'm sure that bashes up against the UN sustainability goals, or the implication of legislation bashes up against that.
A little promotion here for KTN side. We are holding an event at the end of the month on the 26th. We look at the role of artificial intelligence on geospatial data. We have a mini conference, 2.5 hours plus networking event, and we have a panel trying to demystify some of the concepts of artificial intelligence, and another panel where we show some use cases which I believe are quite original and not discussed often, one of which, for example, is insurance, another one is recruitment. So if anyone is interested, please join on our event, 26th of November.
Thank you, Luca. If you want to place the link in the chat box,
I will.
For the attendees and see. Well, look, we've gone over time by quite a bit, but I think it's well worth it. Once again, I'd like to extend a thanks to all of the panel representatives on the panel. Thank you for presenting. Thank you for spending the time today. I think it's been well worth it. It has been very valuable insights, so really appreciate it. Thank you again.